Happy Tuesday and welcome back to Post Sports Live. I'm your host, Jonathan Forsythe. Joining me in the Post TV studios, Neil Greenberg of Fancy Stats, Marissa Payne of The Early Lead, and Keith McMillan, NFL and Redskins editor. How are you guys doing today?
Doing great.
Yeah?
Great.
All right. Apologies for my voice. I'm a little bit hoarse after a fun weekend away. It was a golf trip this week. But we got a lot to talk about on the show today, and I'll let you guys do most of the talking, preferably. We're going to start with the Redskins, who dropped their fifth game of the season now at Arizona. Kirk Cousins, 3 costly turnovers in the fourth quarter. We're going to focus on Cousins, guys, and I'm going to ask you guys whether or not you've seen enough to make a determination about sort of his ceiling in the NFL, if we've reached that point yet. We'll get into some bold predictions for their next game, which should be a winnable one against the Titans. We're going to get into some NFL conversation. Who's the best team? There are 6 teams in the league right now who still have 1 loss. Get your thoughts on which one is the best through 6 weeks. And also your games to watch in Week 7. We'll put a nice bow on the Nationals and kind of look ahead to next year as far as the biggest changes and the differences between next year's roster and this year's Nationals squad. Early impressions, Neil, for Barry Trotz in the Trotz era. Good start so far defensively, at least for the Caps, it seems like on paper. And we'll talk about the Bradley Beal injury for the Wizards and how big a loss that is. Let's get right to it, Keith, with Kirk Cousins and the Redskins. Another disappointing loss at Arizona on Sunday. Have we seen enough of Kirk Cousins through 13 career games to determine whether or not he can be an effective starting quarterback in this league?
Yes, we've seen enough. And I think people come down on both sides of this. I think we've seen that he can move the ball, can manage the game, and when things are going well, he plays well. I think when his team gets behind, he's shown this now. You know, if it was just the Giants game, you say maybe it's a fluke, but he's done it twice in 3 weeks now with melting down against both the Giants and the Cardinals, pressing, trying to make too much happen, and some of the throws. The last pick against the Cardinals seemed like it was just thrown into the middle of the field, just throwing just to make a throw. And he does seem to lose his cool a little bit when things get tough, and that's not something you want to see out of someone you project to be a long-term starter. But I think on the flip side, you've seen he can move the ball. So if he was on a team where the defense gave you big plays, where the special teams gave you big plays, he could be a viable starter.
Marissa, where do you fall on this? He is 10th in the league in passing yards, 10th in touchdowns. His passer rating is not that great either, but it's actually not terrible. He's 3rd in yards per game. But the costly turnovers, have you sort of seen enough to make a determination on him?
Yeah, I mean, with all those things you said, things can always be worse. But the turnovers for me are something that's completely unacceptable. That many in that span of games is nothing you want from a starter. The other problem I see with him is I just don't see that same fire and personality that I feel like you need to actually lead a team. He seems more content, more comfortable when he is in that backup spot, which, I mean, maybe we haven't seen enough because maybe he hasn't had time to, full season, for example, to get comfortable in that leadership spot. But from what we have seen, I don't see him, I don't see coaches and owners trying to salivate over who's going to get Cousins.
Right. So you think sort of backup status is his ceiling at this point, or?
I think so, and I think for him that's where he seems to feel most comfortable in that spot.
Neil, do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, he's a marginal backup at best. I mean, we saw enough of it last year. Last year he had 7 interceptions on 155 attempts. This year he's got 8 on 188 attempts. I mean, this is who Kirk Cousins is. He's turnover prone. He can throw the ball downfield. He can make his reads. And like you said, he's got a ton of yardage per game, but more than half those yards come after the catch. So he has Deshaun Jackson this year, which is making him look a lot better than he is. And Kirk Cousins was never a franchise quarterback. He was never a starter in the NFL. He had some good games and he has some really atrocious games, and that's what we're seeing right now. But he is at best a backup, but he's a replaceable backup, meaning you can find Kirk Cousins almost anywhere in the NFL.
Wow. So do you agree with, I mean, here's my one pushback to that. 13 career games over the course of 3 seasons. Obviously, he came in pinch hitting duty 2 years ago as a rookie, won the game at Cleveland. Last year, at the end of the season, a disastrous season. The team wasn't really playing for much, and he lost those games. You guys all sort of seem to agree that you've seen enough. He doesn't have the potential beyond this?
Well, I don't think he's bad, and I think he's going to remain in the NFL for a while, because quarterbacks that even are decent are hard enough to come by. And the thing with him is, we haven't seen it in crunch time. Even that great game that he played in Philadelphia, where he threw for 427 yards, they had the ball with a chance to win on the 41-yard line, and didn't move the ball in 4 plays. So in the NFL, whether it's right or not, they judge you on how you do in the fourth quarter, on how you do on third downs, or how you do in crunch time. And the past few games, Kirk Cousins hasn't got it done at that time, and I think right now that's submarined his value.
And he hasn't done well under pressure. He's got a 56 quarterback rating under pressure this year. I mean, he just hasn't shown the ability to gut out a game, right? When I'm looking at a quarterback in the NFL that's a starter, they can gut out some games. He can't.
And maybe the biggest concern is his passer rating on third down, too, to your point of under pressure, which is far and away the lowest in the league, even below some rookies. All right, guys, let's get to some bold predictions for the 2-4 Titans visiting FedEx Field. I wonder what color commentators are going to be on this one for the broadcast. The F team. Oh, that's kind of a low blow. All right, Keith, give me your bold prediction. I said I was going to start with Neil. Keith, give me your bold prediction for this Titans-Redskins game this weekend.
Don't you think it's a bold enough prediction just to say they'll win this week?
At this point, a 1-5 team, yes.
All right, here's a bold prediction. They'll start a run of they're going to win 3 out of the next 4.
Wow.
They have the Titans. They go to the Cowboys on Monday night. They have the Vikings. They're at the Vikings. They bye, and then the Buccaneers. These are a handful of the worst teams in the NFL. Now, Washington has to play well. They have not necessarily played well every game, but I think the effort they gave, say, against Seattle, even for parts of the game against Arizona, you get a better result against the Titans, against the Vikings, against the Bucs.
3 out of 4. That is bold. Marissa, what's your bold prediction for this week?
That might be too bold. But I'm going to get a little sassy with mine and say Cousins again is going to throw, maybe 2-3 interceptions. They're going to take him out. They're going to put in Colt McCoy. He's going to win. He's going to get scrappy and going to win. And then every journalist everywhere in D.C. is going to declare the Colt McCoy era. This is going to last for about 2 weeks, and then we're going to declare it over because the same thing is going to happen. It's a cycle.
Man, you guys are getting really bold. I love the creativity in the bold predictions. We're going several weeks down the road now. Neil, continue.
Well, I agree with Keith. This is a winnable game for the Redskins. It's probably the most winnable game on the remaining schedule coming in. But the running game for Washington hasn't been able to get much done. They've been under 90 yards for the past 4 games. Tennessee is allowing 4 yards per carry. I could see Alfred Morris and Roy Halou combining for 150 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns. That's my bold prediction in a win. So there you go.
They need more production out of the running game for sure. I'm going to go Jordan Reed touchdown. Mine's a very simple prediction, much less bold than all 3 of you guys. But
it's bold to predict that Jordan Reed
he stays healthy. That's actually a good point. So maybe he scores the touchdown in the first quarter before he gets hurt or whatever. Anyway, all right. We actually finished that with 5 seconds to go in this segment. Let's move on to the wider NFL guys. And Keith, I mentioned at the top, there's 6 teams in the NFL that have 1 loss. One of them has a tie in Cincinnati. Which one of those 6 teams, San Diego, Philly, Dallas, Arizona, Denver, Cincinnati, would you say is the best team in the NFL right now? Or would you say somebody else?
This is why I love the NFL. You can't definitively answer that question. Now, we're all going to make an argument for a team or 2 teams and maybe have a passionate argument. I don't think there's a clear answer right now, and that's the fun of it. I think the team I'd least like to play, if I was a fan of an opposing team or a coach, would probably be Denver. I think that offense, when it gets going, when Peyton Manning gets going, they can outscore you. They don't even have to play great defense or special teams. I think Philly, everybody would be salivating over them if Nick Foles had completed a pass on 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1 in San Francisco. Remember, they nearly came back and won that game. They'd be 6-0. They'd be the toast of the NFL. Right now, Dallas is probably the team that everybody's toasting, and I think the Chargers are the team that's playing the best, although they squeak past
Oakland. So you're just going to comment on every single team and not leave anything for Marissa or Neil?
They can have a good, strong point. I don't think there's a clear answer. I think the teams that are playing the best right now are Dallas and San Diego.
Both having won 5 in a row.
But going forward, I don't know if I'd be as afraid of those teams as I would be of Denver.
All right, Marissa, what do you think?
I'm with Keith in that it's so hard to answer this question. The any given Sunday scenario where any team can win at any time. On paper, if I were to just lay everything out, Dallas is looking incredible right now. That hurts to say as someone who lives in D.C., but it's the truth. But I still think Seattle can get back to where it was last year and really strike fear in the hearts of everyone that they face. I think Russell Wilson is a force, possibly the best quarterback in the NFL, especially going forward. And I know you don't like some of the players on the Seahawks, but they make plays. They make plays.
I would have disagreed with you on Dallas if not for the win that they just pulled off this Sunday. I would have said, I'm still not buying into that, but that's as impressive a win as I think we've seen all season out of any team. Neil, what do you think?
It's clearly Denver. I mean, Denver has Peyton Manning, who's arguably the best quarterback in the league. The defense is solid. Denver has wins over Indianapolis, Kansas City, Arizona. Arizona beats San Diego and San Francisco, and the only loss Denver has is to Seattle. I mean, this is the best team in the league. They have the best 1-2 punch in Peyton Manning and Julius Thomas. They have the most touchdowns this season as a combo. It's no team wants to play Denver right now. They're far and away the best team. It may not even be close necessarily. You have Denver and then San Diego and Seattle as 2 and 3, but it's Denver far and away.
But Denver hasn't been blowing teams out. They're winning games.
They haven't, but they've been beating quality teams week after week. I mean, those are quality wins. I mean, Indianapolis has come back very, very strong since that loss. As I said, Kansas City, Arizona. I mean, their only weak, quote unquote, weak win is to the Jets, who are terrible. But they've been great. Yeah, they've been great.
Right. You mentioned the Colts. They've won 4 in a row, highest scoring team in the league. Yeah. Andrew Luck, MVP candidate.
Yeah, without a doubt.
They could be a team that that is somebody to watch as the season progresses. All right, Week 7 games to watch. Neil Greenberg, lead us off.
I'm looking at Denver and San Francisco. Colin Kaepernick versus Peyton Manning. Manning needs just 2 touchdowns to pass Favre as the all-time touchdown leader. He may have that in the first quarter. But what the storyline that I love is Frank Gore winning the job back from Carlos Hyde in the offseason. He's averaging 4.3 yards per attempt, 2 of those after content. I mean, here's a guy at 31 years old, knew his roster spot was shaky at best and made a push. And it's not easy to push the young guys out of a running back slot, especially in today's NFL. I mean, Frank Gore's the guy. That's the game I'm watching.
And at 4-2, San Francisco seems to legit. At least have righted the ship.
Yeah, if they win, they're 5-2. Denver's 5-2. I mean, don't count out that being the Super Bowl matchup a couple of weeks down the line.
Yeah, NFC West is wide open.
Yeah, that defense in San Francisco. I mean, remember they still have potentially Navarro Bowman and Aldon Smith coming back sometime later this season, and they're already pretty good.
Marissa, what's your game to watch?
I chose Texans Steelers.
Okay. Please explain why.
There's really only one reason. J.J. Watt, the most watchable guy in football right now. And, I said this last time. My game to watch was, I think, Bills-Texans.
The
for
Bills,
the same
Texans,
reason.
That's right, J.J.
But look what happened during that game. Look what happened last game. He gets a touchdown.
He is fun to
It's
watch.
crazy. Speaking of MVP candidates,
absolutely.
The first defensive player in 27 years, that's a good possibility.
Even in the conversation, I mean, he's right up there. It needs to be.
Yeah.
He's got more touchdowns than some teams.
Yeah, he's got more touchdowns than
Calvin Johnson.
Yeah,
he's legit.
LaShawn McCoy. I mean, he's the most giftable as a blogger,
and
as
he
a sports
can dance.
blogger. Well, he can't dance.
He's got
which
the
is why you want to keep watching it,
moves.
though. It's why you want to keep watching it.
He's got the moves.
I mean, he is the most giftable of all football
The
players.
most giftable. All right,
So
I
I
like
love
that. I like that approach. Keith, what game are you watching Week 7?
I'm going to go Bengals at Colts. You guys mentioned the Colts' prolific offense. This is in a league where you have Denver, you have Philadelphia running up-tempo offenses. You have much more accomplished quarterbacks struggling where Tom Brady's up and down week to week, Drew Brees. Indianapolis seems to bring it every week. You got the Bengals, who defensively were great for 3 games. Thought they'd have a pretty good season. They've been shaky the past 2. They got blown out Monday night against the Patriots. They gave up 37 in a tie to the Panthers on Sunday. So now you have a team that's going to Indianapolis that we thought would have a great defense, facing what's been a much better offense in practice than they look on paper. I think you look at the Colts, you say, they got a couple of playmakers, T.Y. Hilton maybe, but they're not loaded. And Andrew Luck really makes them go.
Yeah, Andrew Luck is loaded. That's who's loaded. I'm actually curious about the Saints-Lions game. I think that those are 2 teams that could be going in different directions. The Saints at 2-3 coming off a bye, going to Detroit. I'm not sold on Detroit being a contender in the NFC North yet, but if they win that game, I think maybe they would be. So 5-2 would be a good start for them. All right, let's move on, guys, to the Nationals. To put a bow on the season, we're not going to open any scabs from the loss of the Giants, but I want to look at next year, Neil, and start with you on this. What do you expect to be the biggest differences, not just roster-wise, but anything with next year's squad versus this year's team?
The expectations are probably going to be a lot lower. I mean, this was a team that had a new coach and a new manager, and Matt Williams, and they, as the season progressed, they overcame some injuries, and then they were the World Series favorite. They were the darling of the National League. I think expectations are going to be a little bit lower. It's going to be tough for them to be as successful as they were this year. They're not going to have LaRoche more than likely. The bullpen is not going to have Soriano, and he played great for the Nationals in the first half of the year. There's no denying that. So they may be a little bit thinner in that department. Expectations will be a bit lower. They'll make the playoffs. Everything will be good. But I really do think we're on the cusp of this team not necessarily breaking hearts and causing some jaded fans, but I don't think they're going to have as much hype going forward next season as they did this year.
So you expect them almost to take a step back, or just with expectations?
I think they're going to take a slight step back only because it's very difficult to continue doing what they did this year. But the expectations will be a little bit lower too. They're not going to be the World Series favorite, I don't believe.
Right.
And I think the fans won't anoint them as World Series favorites until they start to win some playoff games, some playoff series.
But remember, they were World Series favorites this year after not making the playoffs last year.
Yeah, they were, but I think it's going to be a little bit lower this time around.
Marissa, what do you think?
I gotta disagree with you.
All right.
I think the expectations are going to be very high. I think people are coming down now because of the playoff performance. But you compare that those 4 games to the entire season. I mean, the Nationals played great that entire season. We got some. I think the big thing is trying to maintain Asdrubal Cabrera.
Mm-hmm.
I think if they can keep him, that would be a really good idea. LaRoche, I don't think is as important. I think LaRoche is great, but I think Zimmerman can fill in great. And I think he'd make a great first baseman, and he's a clutch hitter. If healthy.
Yeah, better bat. You have to assume LaRoche is on his way out. It's interesting you mentioned the second base. That's a question between Espinoza and Cabrera. Yeah. And Cabrera wants to play shortstop, but it's his natural position.
But he has said as well that he would play second base to stay with the Nats.
Right.
He likes being here, and I think he seems to fit in well. And I think that's one of the best parts of the Nats is sort of the sort of morale that exists in that locker room. It seems like all the guys get along, and there's not necessarily a diva on the team that wants to take the whole spotlight. I know the media sometimes, throwing ourselves under the bus, sometimes throws the spotlight on certain players a lot. But
does it rhyme with Mice Marper?
Hey, he showed up in the postseason, one of the few guys to.
Yeah.
Can't knock him for that. Keith, what do you think about the expectations question? This has kind of turned into a tiebreaker now, which it wasn't intended. But do you agree that they're going to be lower than last year, or do you think that they'll be pretty high again based on the core of the team returning?
I think it would be good if the expectations were lower because I think the pressure of failing now two out of the past 3 seasons in the playoffs, it puts a lot of pressure on them going into the season. As for will the expectations be lower, it's hard to say because it's still. I'm going to say no or slightly because they're still loaded. They're going to lose LaRoche, most likely move Zimmerman in at first base. If they are able to keep Cabrera, it gives them not only a set lineup, but they have lineup flexibility, which means if Ian Desmond is hurt, you can move Cabrera over to short, put Espinoza in. If Rendon can play second, Zimmerman can play the outfield. They have Tyler Moore, who will be off the bench, can play first. They have lineup flexibility. They have a deep pitching staff. I think within maybe real knowledgeable baseball circles, people will still count this as a team that has a chance to win the World Series. Anything can happen once you get in the postseason. We've learned that. But locally, probably the expectations will be dialed back a little bit just because you've had the heartbroken now.
There won't be the willingness to jump on and say, yes, anoint the team. I get that.
Now you got to see it in the postseason. You say they could win 100 games in the regular season. You say, that's great, but let me see something in the playoffs.
I actually tend to agree with you guys just based on the fact that the starting rotation is going to come back, and that's the best rotation in baseball. I mean, with that gives them the early sort of favorites in the division at a minimum. And you said that you thought they'd go to the playoffs anyway. So we'll have to see. Certainly, good debate there, guys. Let's talk about the Capitals. Keith, I'll start with you, and we'll let our fancy stats man take up the anchor on this. Give me your early impressions through 2 games. Overtime loss, a shootout in the first game to Montreal, and then a shutout win at Boston. Early impressions of Barry Trotz.
Well, you don't want to draw any grand pronouncements from 2 games.
Oh, come on, 2 games. Let's do it. We were talking about the best team in the NFL after 6 weeks.
Hey, that's at least 6 weeks.
That's true.
No, but in all seriousness, Trotz was brought in here with a reputation as a successful coach in the NFL, in the NHL, in Nashville, and as a defensive guy. And they turned in a shutout, right off the bat. We read the story today from Alex Pruitt about how well Holtby's playing. They're letting him do his thing. So I think your early impression would be good, but this is a team, just how we were talking about the Nationals a minute ago, you want to see it consistent, you want to see it down the line, you want to see it in the postseason.
Marissa, early impressions of the Caps under Trotz.
So far so good.
Right.
You had the one tie which ended in the shootout that didn't go our way, but through that, Holtby only let in the 2 games 1 goal through, and a shutout in TD Garden in Boston, not since I think October that's happened. Of last year, right? It's like a year ago.
Wouldn't be much of a stat if it was this year.
Not 6 days ago. But I think OV2 scoring twice in the 1 game, that's a good thing. I know he's gone on some dry spells last season, which sort of got people down. So I don't know if it's the vibe in the locker room that he's changed or what's going on, but he seems all right. So far, so good.
All right, early returns are good. You guys are catching that. Makes sense. Neil, give us your analysis.
We actually did like a little Caps preview a couple weeks ago, and I mentioned 2 areas to keep an eye on. One was the goaltending, especially with Mitch Korn, the goaltending coach here. We talked about it. Hope he stopped 52 or 53 shots. That won't last obviously for the season, but great to see that's already starting to pay some dividends. And then defensively, there's a couple of things at play here. One, they're allowing fewer shots when they're on the penalty kill. They allowed the most shots per time shorthanded last year. They're averaging a little bit over 1 per time shorthanded this year. They were close to 2 last year. Big improvement. And secondly, the defensive depth is so much better that now you're seeing defensive pairs out there for 15 minutes, 17 minutes at even strength versus 19, 20 minutes because they had all these Hershey Bears in the lineup that they really couldn't trust with ice time. They had Carlson and Alsner out there. So that's a big difference. The puck possession is much better. The shot suppression is much better. These are all the things that we talked about a couple weeks ago. We're starting to see that. Yes, it's only 2 games, but so far, so good, and this is exactly what we needed to see. Even forget about the shootout loss; those are fluky to begin with. But we're seeing everything that what we wanted to see in terms of improvement under Trotz, and I really do think I've never been this optimistic about the Caps before this early, but I do think that they're going to look really good the entire season.
What's the bigger early impression, the big hits from Orpik, or the fact that they actually took 2 of the better teams of the Eastern Conference, 1 to overtime and shutting 1 out on the road?
It's how they're playing. They decimated Montreal in the early goings of that opener game. Montreal could not get a shot on net. And yeah, the hits from Orpik are good, and he's been playing well, but it's just the whole defense from top to bottom improved so much, and it's going to make such a big difference down the stretch, and especially in the playoffs if they get there.
All right. Let's move on to the Wizards, guys. Last segment. Keith, I'll start with you on the Bradley Beal broken left wrist injury. How big a loss for the Wizards is that to start the season after high expectations coming in after their playoff run last year? How big a loss is this, and who's going to fill his shoes?
It's a big loss in the sense that he's obviously one of their best players.
Yeah, sure.
That they remember 2 seasons ago when they lost John Wall to start the season. They started off 4-28, right. and they never got it going. They played well actually when they got him back that year, but they never got it going. So it's gonna hurt them as far as getting the chemistry with Beal and Pierce on the floor together. But I don't think it's that big a deal because if you're gonna have a 6-week injury, you much rather have it now, when you have time to tinker with the lineups, time to get young guys some burn, whether it's Glenn Rice Jr., whether Otto Porter plays a lot of minutes. You want to see those guys play anyway. The only thing, the big concern, obviously, you want Beal to be able to come back and have chemistry with the rest of the guys. But I think there's a whole January, February, March to get that done. And you don't want to burn out Paul Pierce too early. I think that's the other thing. He's capable of playing shooting guard, one of the best in the league for a long time. He's now sort of a stretch four, yeah. And you just don't want to burn him out because he's here to help close games, to win big games, April, May, hopefully further down the line.
So expect to see a lot of the younger guys, is
I
what
would
you're
say
saying.
so.
Marissa, what do you think? How big a loss is for the Wizards?
I know in Vegas it doesn't matter at all.
Really?
They didn't change any of the
expectations, really?
I think they're scheduled to win like one less game than they were
wow.
before. So, but their chances of going to the playoffs and stuff don't change with his loss, which was surprising to me because I don't know, his 3-point shooting is pretty above par compared to a lot of other people on that team. I think that's going to be missed. So if they can make up for that by getting these younger guys in and I don't know, training them better to how to shoot from the perimeter or just changing their style a little bit with Beal gone, then I don't think it's going to be that big of an issue. But I think it will hurt team chemistry, I think, a little bit coming back when he gets back, when they haven't been practicing with him.
Neil?
I don't think it's that big of a deal. I mean, yeah, like Marissa said, he shot 48.2% from the three-point arc. That was a huge improvement over the year before. Typically, that type of improvement doesn't sustain itself all that much, and that isn't a strength of John Wall. I mean, he's not a very good three-point shooter, but when you look at the offense and points for and against with Beal on and off the court, it's worth maybe a win over a 12-game series, and that's why the Vegas odds hasn't shifted all that much. You look at when Kevin Durant went down with injury, they shut down the NBA futures book, and you weren't allowed to bet on any of the futures in terms of who would win the East, who would win. So that just shows you the different type of impact each player has on their respective teams. It's a big name, so it's I guess to Wizards fans it feels like a big deal, but we're talking about maybe one, maybe two wins over the time he's going to be out 12, 15 games. It's not going to be that big of an impact.
I'm wondering, do you guys think it's going to change the personality of the team on the court? Because all this talk about sort of the Wizards being the new bad boys on the court, and Beal always seems kind of one of the nicer guys.
Nice
you
guy,
don't really
right,
see him
right.
trying to get into it with Joakim Noah or whatever.
Right.
So it's
Interesting. Well,
I feel like it might.
And you would think Porter would be the same way because he's a quiet guy, and I don't know that Glenn Rice is the most fiery guy out there on the court either.
I honestly think the biggest difference, I don't think they'll have a problem scoring. They can even go Miller. They could go Miller and Wall if they had to at guard. If late in games if they need to. Rice can score. Xavier Silas, the guy they like in camp, he can score. The question is how are they going to lock when they have another big shooting guard come into the game? Who's going to play defense on him?
My concern would be, does Wall take even more three-point shots now,
right.
which is not good for the team at all. I mean, that to me is going to be something that I would watch. Is he going to chuck more from beyond the arc?
That's got to be Pierce, right? Filling the three-point shooting
You
void.
would think so, but John Wall, every year he's moved further and further back, and he's gotten worse and worse.
I think it could be a blessing in disguise in some ways to get Glenn Rice and Porter more better minutes in games that matter, and work them into the rotation so they'll be ready come playoff time. All right, good conversation today, guys. For Neil Greenberg, Marissa Payne, Keith McMillan, I'm your host, Jonathan Forsythe. Thanks for joining us on Post Sports Live. We'll see you right here next Tuesday, same place, same time.